October 21st, 1996, about 11 in the morning, a Death Valley park ranger named Dave Brenner is riding in a military helicopter over the southern end of the park. It's a routine surveillance mission. They're scanning the backcountry for illegal drug labs, kind of flight that usually turns up nothing. But today, Brenner sees something. A vehicle sitting in the middle of a dry wash in Anvil Spring Canyon. Now, there's no road in Anvil Spring Canyon. Hasn't been one for years. The whole area was designated federal wilderness in 1994. Vehicles are prohibited, period. And even back when there was a road, it was a brutal four-wheel drive track that miners used to get into the Butte Valley. Nobody in their right mind would take a passenger car down there. But that's exactly what Brenner's looking at. A green 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan, the kind of thing you'd rent at an airport and drive your kids to Disneyland in. And it's destroyed. The helicopter sets down, Brenner approaches on foot, the van's buried up to its axles in sand, and both rear tires are completely flat. The left front tire is flat also, and the rims are bent. Tracks in the sand behind it show that this thing was driven at least 200 feet on shredded tires before it finally stopped moving. It's covered in a thick layer of dust, like it's been out there for months. The van's locked, and there's no one around. No footprints, or gear, or any signs of life in any direction. Just a minivan in the middle of nowhere that looks like somebody drove it straight into the desert and then vanished off the face of the earth. Brenner writes down the plate number, 3MX-S137. California tags. He radios it back to park headquarters. What comes back isn't good. The California Highway Patrol says the vehicle was reported stolen by Los Angeles Police Department on September 10th, over 6 weeks ago. Belongs to a dollar rent-a-car, rented July 8th. July, that's over 3 months ago. And the renters are flagged. There's an Interpol alert from August 14th. 4 German nationals missing. Egbert Rimkus, 34 years old, his 11-year-old son Georg Weber, Egbert's girlfriend, 28-year-old Cornelia Meyer, and her 4-year-old son Max. 2 adults, 2 children from Dresden, Germany. They flew into the United States on July 8th. They were supposed to fly home on July 27th. They never got on that plane, and nobody's seen or heard from any of them since July 22nd. That was 91 days ago. 91 days in a place where the high temperature on July 23rd reached 124 degrees. 91 days, 6 miles from the nearest dirt road, and 16 miles from pavement. 91 days, and the only evidence that 4 human beings were ever here is locked inside a minivan with 3 flat tires that's sinking into the sand. And within 48 hours, Death Valley launched the largest search operation in the park's history. 45 searchers, 2 helicopters, 8 horses. Teams from 6 different agencies spread across Anvil Canyon, Butte Valley, Warm Spring Road, Mengle Pass, and the surrounding wilderness. They searched for 4 days. They covered hundreds of square miles of some of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. And they found exactly one thing, a single beer bottle under a brush about 1.5 miles from the van. It matched the brand found inside the vehicle, but that's it. That's all they got. No bodies, no clothing, tracks, no trail. 4 people walked away from that van in the desert that somehow swallowed them whole. The search was called off on October 26. The family was presumed dead, and then nothing for 13 years. The case went cold. The internet picked it up and theories started flying. They staged their disappearance to start new lives. They were German spies trying to infiltrate China Lake Naval Weapons Center. They were murdered. They were abducted. None of it panned out, but neither did anything else, really, because nobody could explain the most basic question at the center of the whole thing. How did 4 people disappear in the open desert without leaving a single trace? Where do you even go from a place like that? In 2009, a search and rescue volunteer from Riverside, California, thought that he knew the answer, and what he found will change how you think about every decision you've ever made in your life. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History. This is the Death Valley Germans. So who were these people? Let's start with Egbert Rimkus, 34 years old from Dresden, Germany, and Dresden in 1996 is a specific kind of place. The Berlin Wall doesn't exist anymore. The whole region is in the middle of reunification, which sounds great on paper, but on the ground meant economic chaos. Jobs were disappearing, currency was changing overnight, an entire population tried to figure out how it would operate in a system they'd never lived in. That's the world Egbert's coming from. He's got an 11-year-old son named George Weber from a previous marriage to a woman named Heike Weber. And he's got a girlfriend, Cornelia Meyer, 28. Cornelia is the one with her life together. She's running a business in Germany. She's got a 4-year-old son named Max. So picture this group. A couple in their late 20s, early 30s, 2 boys, one almost a teenager, one barely out of toddlerhood, and they're planning a trip of a lifetime to America. They fly out of Frankfurt on July 8th, 1996. They land in Seattle, then immediately catch a connecting flight to Los Angeles. At LAX, they pick up a rental van from Dollar Rent-A-Car, a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager. The van gets rented under Cornelia's name because Egbert can't produce his driver's license. It's a curious detail. The plan is a big loop. California coast, Las Vegas, Death Valley, Yosemite, then return the van to LA by July 26th and fly home on July 27th. It's 3 weeks in America, 4 people, 1 minivan. For the first week, they base themselves around San Clemente down in Orange County. Normal tourist stuff, beach towns, the California coast. But there's a problem. And it starts showing up early. Money. On July 12th, Egbert calls his bank in Dresden and requests $1,500 be wired to a Bank of America branch in San Clemente. The money ends up getting sent to a branch in Los Angeles instead. But either way, he needs cash badly enough to make an international call to his bank 4 days into his trip. Now that's not a great sign. Their travels get a little vague after San Clemente. Photos recovered from their camera later suggest that they drove up to the California coast a bit. But by mid-July, they were in Las Vegas. They check into the Treasure Island Hotel. Now on July 21st, Egbert sends a fax from the hotel to his ex-wife back in Germany. He's asking her to wire him money. Think about that. He's asking his ex-wife, the mother of the son he's currently traveling with, to send him cash in Las Vegas. And she says no. So now you've got a family 5 days from their flight home, burning through whatever money they have left, and a rental van due back in LA on the 26th, and a plan that still includes Death Valley and Yosemite. Now, most people would cut their trip short. They'd drive back to LA, return the van, maybe see Yosemite another time. But Egbert doesn't do that. On July 22nd, they check out at Treasure Island and drive to Death Valley. July 22nd, 1996, the recorded high temperature at the Furnace Creek weather station in Death Valley is 123 degrees Fahrenheit. The next day hits 124. Now, at some point on the 22nd, the group stops at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. Receipt records show that 2 copies of a booklet called Death Valley National Monument Museum text in German language were sold that day. A copy of that same booklet was later found in the van, so we know that they were at Furnace Creek on July 22nd. We know they had maps and a plan, and we know they were low on money, which matters more than you'd think because a room at the Furnace Creek Ranch in 1996 wasn't cheap. Camping on the valley floor wasn't allowed, and the valley floor at 123 degrees isn't where you'd want to sleep anyway. But here's the thing, if you go up into the side canyons on the west side of the valley, the elevation grants you about 15 to 20 degrees of cooling. There's sometimes water in the upper reaches, and you can camp for free. A private investigator named Emmett Harder, who spent years working this case, later got access to the photos on the Germans' recovered camera. He identified one image as a sunset shot looking east down into the main valley taken from Hanapak Canyon. That's 17 miles north of where the van was eventually found, which means on the night of July 22nd, this family drove up Hanapak Canyon in a 2-wheel drive minivan successfully and camped. Think about what that does to your confidence. You just navigated a significant stretch of backcountry dirt road in a vehicle that has no business being on it, and it worked. The road was rough, but you made it. The van handled it. Maybe these desert roads aren't as bad as people say. That feeling, that false confidence, is about to get all 4 of them killed, because the next morning, July 23rd, they're going to leave Hanapak Canyon and head south along West Side Road towards Panamint Mountains. And they're going to make a decision that seems perfectly reasonable on a map, but in the real world, in the July heat, in a Plymouth Voyager minivan with 2 kids in the back, it's a death sentence. So it's the morning of July 23rd, 1996. The Germans break camp in Hanapak Canyon and head south. They drop down to the West Side Road and turn west towards Warm Spring Canyon. Now, West Side Road at this point is actually a pretty decent dirt road. It's well graded. Trucks use it to get to the talc mines and the Warm Spring Canyon. It's bumpy, but manageable, even in a minivan. So they're driving along and everything's fine. The road's cooperating, the van's handling it. They've got maps and a plan. The plan is to cut west through the Butte Valley over Mengel Pass and come out on the other side near a ghost town called Ballarat. From Ballarat, you can get to Highway 178, and from there, Yosemite. It's not the most direct route, but it's the scenic one, and these are tourists. They didn't fly 6,000 miles to take a highway. To be fair, their maps showed that it was a viable route. It had a route, and people do drive it in four-wheel vehicles with high clearance, not in a Plymouth Voyager. But the Germans didn't know that yet. They reached the Warm Spring mining camp. It's an old settlement along Warm Spring Road. From the road, it looks like an actual place. Buildings, structures, the kind of spot you'd expect to find somebody. But it's abandoned. Nobody's there. They stop anyway and sign the visitor's guest book that's kept inside one of the old buildings. The entry's dated July 23rd, and it's written in German. It reads, Connie, Egbert, Georg, Max, we're going over the pass. Now, the pass they're talking about is Mengel Pass. It sits on the southwest border of Death Valley National Park, and it's the only way to cross the Panamint Mountain Range for miles in either direction. It's also one of the most savage roads in the California desert. We're talking a narrow, rocky, rutted four-wheel drive track carved into the side of a mountain. It's the kind of road where experienced off-roaders in lifted Jeeps with lockers and skid plates still get nervous. A two-wheel drive minivan with road tires has absolutely zero chance of making it through. But here's the thing. The Germans don't know how bad it is until they've already committed. They leave Warm Spring and continue west. The road takes them south through Hanapaw Canyon and into Butte Valley. Now, the road between Warm Spring and Butte Valley is rough, but it's passable. They make it through, and making it through does something dangerous to your judgment. Every mile of bad road you survive in a vehicle that shouldn't be there makes the next mile seem less scary. You start thinking, maybe you can handle it. They cross Butte Valley and pass an abandoned geologist's cabin. They even take an American flag from it, which tells you that they're still in tourist mode, still having fun, still thinking of this as an adventure. But as they approach Mengel Pass, it becomes obvious. This road is a four-wheel drive road, not a kind of tough road or take it slow road. A rugged, boulder-strewn mountain pass that's far beyond the capabilities of their Plymouth minivan. They can't go forward, so they turn around. Now, this is the moment, right here. This is where everything changes. They're somewhere near the intersection of Mengel Pass Road and a road that leads back east through Anvil Canyon, and Egbert's looking at the map. Going back the way they came means retracing the treacherous road between Butte Valley and Warm Spring. It would take hours. It would dump them back on the east side of the valley, the wrong direction from where they wanted to go. They want to get to LA by the 26th. Yosemite is still on the list, and the clock is still ticking. But there's another route on the map, Anvil Canyon Road. It runs east back towards the main valley. On the map, it looks like a shortcut, a way to cut straight back to the paved road without backtracking. What the map doesn't tell you, what it can't tell you, is that Anvil Canyon Road hasn't been used in years. It's a wilderness area. The road is a sandy wash choked with rocks and gravel. It's the kind of surface that eats two-wheel drive vehicles alive. But Egbert doesn't know that. He makes the turn. The first few miles are drivable, rough but drivable, and the canyon is wide enough. The van's moving, but it gets worse, fast. The road narrows and the sand gets deeper. The van's low clearance starts dragging and the rear tires blow, both of them. Here's what a lot of people would do at this point. They would stop, they'd get out, they'd assess. But Egbert doesn't stop. He keeps driving. 200 feet on shredded rear tires and bent rims. Why is that? Well, because stopping here means being stranded in a canyon that leads nowhere. At least if he keeps moving, there's a chance he reaches something, a road, a junction, another person. But the van doesn't make it. The sand wins and the axles bury. The Plymouth Voyager comes to a final stop in the middle of Anvil Spring Canyon, 6 miles from the nearest good dirt road, 16 miles from pavement, 40 miles from Furnace Creek. It's July 23rd and the temperature at the van's elevation is approximately 107 degrees. They have some beer, some bourbon, a little bit of wine, some snacks, and a couple of beer bottles. Not nearly enough. 2 adults, 2 children, a dead vehicle, and not a single human being within miles who knows that they exist. Egbert locks the van. That detail is significant. You don't lock a vehicle you're abandoning. You lock a vehicle you expect to come back to. So, I assume he's got a plan. And that plan ain't good. Now let's jump forward 3 months because the Germans don't walk away from that van and immediately die. Like I said, they had a plan. We'll get to that plan a little later. But right now, I need you to understand what was happening on the other side of this, because while the family was out there in the desert, the rest of the world had no idea. Think about the timeline. July 22nd, they check out at Treasure Island in Las Vegas. July 26th, the van is due back at the Dollar Rent-A-Car in Los Angeles. It doesn't show up, but Dollar's policy is to wait at least 30 days before reporting the rental as stolen, so nobody raises a flag. July 27th, their TWA flight to Germany departs, and their seats are empty. Nobody from the airline calls anyone. August 14th, that's when Interpol finally issues an alert. Egbert's ex-wife, Weber, she reported them missing back in Germany. Took over 3 weeks from their missed flight for an international alert to go out. September 10th, the LAPD finally reports the van as stolen. That's 46 days after the rental was due back, and nothing happens for another 6 weeks, until October 21st, when Ranger Dave Brenner spots the van from the helicopter. That's 91 days, an entire summer. Whatever happened to the Germans out there in Anvil Canyon, it happened in July, and nobody even started looking until late October. Now, once Brenner reports the van and the Interpol connection comes back, things move fast. By October 23rd, search teams are in place, and this isn't a small operation. The China Lake Mountain Rescue Group, one of the most experienced backcountry search teams in the western United States, is on site. They're joined by trackers from the Indian Wells Valley Search and Rescue Group and 8 mounted units from the Kern County Sheriff's Mounted Search and Rescue. Day 1, October 23rd. Teams fan out across Anvil Canyon from the van eastward towards the mouth of the canyon at Warm Spring Road. And the China Lake team finds something. A Bud Ice beer bottle was planted in the sand next to a bush approximately 1.7 miles downstream from the van. The bottle matches the brand found inside the vehicle, but it's not just the bottle. The ledge next to the bush had been brushed clear of rocks. There's a large seat impression in the dirt, and the sitting spot is on the east side of the bush, positioned for shade from the late afternoon sun. So somebody sat here deliberately. They cleared a spot, they sat down, they drank a beer, and rested in the shade. That's a person who's moving with purpose, not panic. That's someone walking in a specific direction and taking a break along the way. Maybe that beer bottle, that seat impression, that would be the first and last clue found in the entire search. Day 2, October 24th, more teams arrive. Nye County Search and Rescue from Nevada, Inyo County Search and Rescue. The search area expands and they're hitting Anvil Canyon in both directions, Warm Spring Road, portions of Butte Valley, Mangle Pass, and the area between the canyon mouth and the West Side Road. 2 helicopters are in the air now. They're searching from above and they're shuttling supplies and personnel, and nothing. Day 3, October 25th, the search goes wider. A DVNP team searches between the mouth of the Anvil Canyon and Badwater Road on the far side of the main valley. The Victorville Search and Rescue team covers the southeastern edges of Butte Valley. A BLM ranger starts working the west side of the Mangle Pass between Ballarat and the Barker Ranch. The Lake Mead National Park team goes north from Anvil Canyon over the mountains and down into Butte Valley. Indian Wells does an intensive search around Willow Spring at the head of Anvil Canyon. Helicopters still in the air and horses on the ground, and nothing. Day 4, October 26th, that's the final day. More areas are checked, like mine shafts, abandoned structures, anywhere a lost person might seek shelter. The Victorville team and the Lake Mead team hit the Striped Butte and Butte Valley. Warm Spring Canyon Road gets walked. Aerial reconnaissance covers all quadrants surrounding Anvil Canyon, including the south, but high winds are limiting visibility. So nothing. 4 days, 45 searchers in the field, 2 helicopters, 8 horses, teams of at least 6 agencies, and an estimated 250 people involved at one point or another. Approximately $80,000 in 1996 dollars, and the only thing they found was that bottle of beer on the first day. Park spokesperson Ann Holiso told the press that there was no reason to suspect foul play. The search was called off, and the family was presumed dead. But here's the thing that nobody said aloud at the time, and everybody in the search community understood. They searched the right areas, and they searched them well. The China Lake Mountain Rescue Group alone is one of the best in the country. These were experienced, skilled people covering the terrain systematically. They searched east of the van. They searched west. They searched north into Butte Valley. They searched the roads and the canyons and the mine shafts and the springs, but they were all operating on the same assumption, that a family stranded in Anvil Canyon would try to get back to civilization, east towards the main valley, west towards Ballarat, or north towards Warm Spring Road, in some direction where there was a road, a building, a person, something. Nobody seriously considered that the Germans went south because south of Anvil Canyon, there's nothing. No roads or buildings, no water or shade, just a vast expanse of open desert that eventually runs into the boundary of China Lake Naval Weapons Center. It's a restricted military installation that stretches for miles. Why would anybody walk in that direction? It's a good question, and for 13 years, nobody had a good answer. In the years after the search, a few private individuals kept poking around in the case. Dick Hasselman, a retired professor from Virginia Tech, made several trips out there. Emmett Harder, the prospector who identified the Hanapa Canyon photo, searched the area multiple times. Now, at some point, somebody reported finding several German-style canteens about 3 miles southeast of the van. The finder was supposedly on a motorcycle, which is illegal in the wilderness area, and never responded to inquiries about the exact location. German canteens southeast of the van. That's south. Curious. But nobody followed up. The case file sat at the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, and the theories kept swirling online. And those bones of Egbert Rimkus, Cornelia Meyer, George Weber, and little Max Meyer lay somewhere in that desert, undiscovered, baking in the sun for 13 years, until a guy from Riverside, California, decided to take a closer look. Tom Mahood, or Mahood, to be honest, I can't really figure out how to pronounce his name. Well, he first came across the story of the Death Valley Germans sometime in the summer of 2008. He was poking around the internet, stumbled onto a Death Valley forum, and saw people talking about this unsolved case of 4 missing German tourists. He Googled around and found a report of the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group that was published in their newsletter called The Talus Pile. It laid out the basics, but not much more. Mahood was intrigued, but moved on. He filed it in the back of his head. Then in February 2009, he joined the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit, the RMRU. He was brand new. He was looking for any training he could get. In late September of that year, he signed up for a 2.5-day course on man tracking in Ridgecrest, California. Now, man tracking sounds ominous, but it just means learning to follow the tracks of people instead of animals. It's a core skill in search and rescue work. The class was hosted by China Lake Mountain Rescue Group. That's the same team that found the beer bottle in Anvil Canyon 13 years earlier. Tom knew a lot of their members would be there, and he figured that this was a chance that he could ask about the Germans. And somebody told him, "You need to talk to Debbie Breitenstein. She's obsessed with it. She was on the original search team and has all the background." In Tom Mahood's world, obsessed is good. He tracked Debbie down at a barbecue at her house near the end of the class. She was a little reluctant at first, like she didn't want to dump an avalanche of information on someone who was just casually curious. But Tom's not casually curious about anything, so she started talking. And what she told him was maybe the most important thing he'd learn about the entire case. Unlike a lot of unsolved mysteries, there wasn't some hidden piece of information that nobody knew about. There wasn't a secret witness or a suppressed report or a cover-up. The basic facts of the case that were already publicly available were all there was. Van found in Anvil Canyon, guest book signed at Warm Spring, beer bottle found under a bush, a massive search, and nothing else. That was it, which only makes the mystery deeper. Tom Mahood went home and went into what he calls data collection mode. He tracked down every piece of information he could find. The DVNP investigator's report, the search logs, the details about what was found in the van, and by the way, that van inventory is worth paying attention to. Inside that locked vehicle, searchers found 2 unopened bottles of Bud Ice beer and 1 empty bottle. 1 empty and 3/4 full bottles of bourbon, several empty large water and juice containers, luggage and clothing, numerous exposed rolls of 35mm film, and a Praktica 35mm camera. Now, 1 new Coleman sleeping bag still in its box, and 1 empty Coleman sleeping bag box. A tent, a pipe with tobacco, a leather card carrier with Swiss bank cards, and a Citicorp card for Egbert. A card from the Seahorse Resort in San Clemente, numerous toys, and an unused compact spare tire and jack. Curious. An unused spare tire and jack. They had a spare, they had the tools to change, but they didn't use them, which means when those tires blew out, the situation was already beyond a simple tire change. You can't jack a van in axle-deep sand. The spare wouldn't have mattered. But here's what else the inventory tells you. Empty water and juice bottles. They drank what they had before they left. Beer and bourbon still in the van. They took some alcohol with them, but left most of it behind. You don't carry heavy glass bottles into the desert if you're trying to move fast. The camera stayed, the tent stayed, the sleeping bag stayed. They took what they could carry and they left everything else locked in the van. Now, these aren't the actions of people who'd given up. They're the actions of people executing a plan. Tom also tracked down the names of 2 private searchers, Emmett Harder and Dick Hasselman, who'd been out there multiple times in the years after the official search ended. He read their reports and studied the maps. And on October 27, 2009, that's 8 months after joining RMRU, Tom drove out of Death Valley alone for his first look at Anvil Canyon. He got to the trailhead at Willow Spring around 10 in the morning and started walking. The first thing that struck him was the burro tracks. Wild burros use Anvil Canyon, and their hoof prints look almost like human sneaker footprints. Tom could see how someone unfamiliar with the desert could mistake them for fresh human tracks and maybe follow them. The second thing that struck him was the sand. The road in the wash was loose and deep. It's incredibly easy to get a vehicle stuck. He reached the van's location using GPS coordinates. There was a rock cairn marking where the front end of the vehicle had come to rest. He flagged the outline and took photos matching the original investigator's report. Then he climbed up on the bank of the wash on the south side of the lake to take pictures. He stopped because standing on that bank, looking south, it suddenly hit him that Egbert probably did the exact same thing. He stood in the exact same spot and he looked in the exact same direction. It was, in Tom's words, a very eerie feeling. He continued east down Anvil Canyon towards the bottle bush. He found it. He sat where the Germans sat, looked at what the Germans looked at, and started thinking. From the bottle bush, the terrain to the south opens up. You can see what looks like a passable route through higher ground. Squaw Spring is up there somewhere. It's a green clump of trees on the hillside. But here's what Tom couldn't figure out that day. What possible reason would the Germans have to go south? He hiked back to his truck by 4:40 and drove home. 10 hours of driving, 7 hours of hiking, more than a little tired. But 2 days later, sitting at home, looking at a map of Death Valley, it hit him. He saw it. He saw why they went south. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it because it made perfect sense. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. And the worst part was, Tom realized he probably would have done the exact same thing. So what did Tom see on that map? Well, here it is. The China Lake Naval Weapons Center sits approximately 9 miles south of where the van got stuck. Now, from the van's location, you can't see it. The terrain blocks the view, but if you climb up out of Anvil Canyon and head south towards higher ground, past Squaw Spring, you eventually reach the edge of a high plateau. And from that plateau, looking south, you'd see a vast open expanse stretching towards the horizon. Somewhere out there is a military base. Now put yourself in Egbert's position. You're stranded and your van is dead. You've got 2 kids, limited water, and no idea how far it is to the nearest paved road. You check your maps. East towards the main valley, that's 16 miles to Badwater Road in July heat. With a 4-year-old, it's not realistic. West towards Ballarat, you just came from that direction. You know how bad the roads are. It's a long way back through rough terrain. North towards Warm Spring Road, it's possible, but the road between Anvil Canyon and Warm Spring is at least a couple hours on foot, and the services at Warm Spring are unknown. It's an abandoned mining camp. But south, there's a military installation. And here's the thing about Egbert. He's German and grew up in East Germany. He's familiar with military bases. In Europe, installations have fences. They have perimeter patrols. They have armed guards at the gates. If you walk up to one, someone's going to be there. That's the piece of information Tom realized Egbert had that most Americans wouldn't. An American would know that a desert military base like China Lake is a sprawling, mostly empty expanse of restricted land. There's no fences along most of the boundary, no patrols or signs, no personnel for miles. The military relies on sheer vastness and remoteness of the terrain for security. But Egbert wouldn't know that. To Egbert, a military base means people and rescue. 9 miles in Egbert's mind, that's a hard walk, but it's a doable one. Now, Tom ran through the rest of the evidence against his theory. The beer bottle at the bottle bush, that's 1.7 miles east of the van. The seat impression on the east side of the bush for the late afternoon's shade. Now that fits. If they left the van and headed east down Anvil Canyon looking for the route south, the bottle bush is right about where you'd expect them to take a break. The Germans' canteens reportedly found 3 miles southeast of the van. Now that's consistent with a southerly route. The fact that every search north, east, and west of the van turned up absolutely nothing, if they'd gone any of those directions, the search teams would have found something. These were some of the best search and rescue teams in the country covering the ground. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. The Germans weren't there. They must be somewhere they hadn't searched. And south hadn't been searched. Now there's one complication. A sleeping bag had been found years earlier near an AT&T relay tower road well to the south. Some people thought it might be connected to the Germans. Now that would have been consistent with a southerly route, but Tom checked into it. The road where the bag was found was patrolled by rangers at least once a week. If the Germans left it in late July, it would have been spotted during the August patrols. The bag wasn't found until September, which meant it was likely dropped by someone else. Plus, Tom hiked to the AT&T tower himself. He climbed it, and he discovered something important. There were no sight lines to the north. The mountain range the tower sits on completely blocks the view. Anyone coming from the direction of the van would never see it, so the tower wasn't a draw. The sleeping bag was a dead end, but the military base theory held up. Tom wrote up his scenario and sent it to the people he'd been corresponding with. The feedback was supportive, but cautious. Everyone's got a theory, right? But Tom wasn't just theorizing, he was planning. The problem was access. The upper alluvial fan south of Anvil Canyon, the area he believed the Germans ended up, was incredibly remote. No roads, no trails, no water source except for the Squaw Spring 2 miles to the north. You couldn't day hike it. You needed to carry enough water for at least 2 days, which meant heavy packs through brutal off-trail terrain. Tom put out feelers for an expedition. Most people were busy or thought it sounded too insane, but he convinced one of his RMRU teammates, a guy named Les Walker, to come along. On the morning of November 11th, 2009, Tom picked up Les in Riverside and they drove to Death Valley. They had a plan. Hike into Anvil Canyon, head south to Squaw Spring for water, carry it up to the upper plateau, camp for 2 nights, search for a full day, and then hike out. Les brought a Spot satellite tracker. It would broadcast their GPS position to a web page so that family and teammates could monitor them in near real time. They also notified the Death Valley National Park staff and Debbie Brettenstein at CLMRG just in case. They started down Anvil Canyon about 11:30 on a cool, sunny November morning. They reached the van and the bottle locations quickly. They turned south and climbed towards Squaw Spring. Now, finding water at Squaw Spring was harder than expected. The main area was dry. They spent 30 minutes searching through brush before finding a small pool in a ravine. Les pumped water through a filter for about an hour to fill a 2.5-gallon collapsible container. Tom stuffed the 20-pound container into his pack. The total weight was 65 pounds. They climbed south through the narrow canyon towards the plateau. Tom was struggling. The weight was crushing. He could only climb short distances before stopping to gasp. By 4:45 that afternoon, just as darkness was falling, they crested the head of the canyon and got their first look at the search area. Tom's first thought, this will take at least several trips to cover. They set up camp on an exposed ridge and the wind picked up. It was cold and miserable, but they were there, finally, in the place nobody ever reached. The next morning, November 12th, they split up. Les head east, Tom head south. They stayed in radio contact, and about an hour and a half into the search, Les keyed his radio. Les Walker's voice comes through the radio. He found a wine bottle, then a piece of daily planner written in German. Tom starts moving towards Les's position. He gets closer. Les radios again. Skeletal remains. Tom reaches the site. It's a small bluff, a low knoll of rock on an open slope about 4,000 feet above the valley floor. The bluff provides maybe 3 or 4 feet of shade when the sun is directly overhead. That's it. That's all the shelter there is out there. Scattered around it are bones, human bones, and they're bleached white, scattered by animals over 13 years. Les found them on the south-facing slope below the bluff. As they reach the immediate area, more items appear. Fragments of the daily planner with German entries, business cards from places the Germans visited during their trip, an empty bottle that matches the one found in the van back in 1996, and then Les finds it. Cornelia Meyer's wallet. Her identification's inside. Now, after 13 years of theories and speculation and dead ends, they're standing at what appears to be the final resting place of at least one of the missing Germans. Tom and Les photograph everything. They mark positions. They document what they can, but now they've got a problem. They're deep in the backcountry with no cell service. No way to contact anyone, and they've just found what is almost certainly evidence in an active missing persons case. They need to get this information to authorities, and fast. It's early afternoon. They pack up and start the long hike out, north through the plateau, down into Anvil Canyon, and west towards the trailhead. They reach the truck and start driving. Now, Les noticed something on the drive in. There's a tiny stretch of Warm Spring Road between the West Side Road and the mouth of Warm Spring Canyon where his iPhone picked up 3 bars of signal, maybe 3/4 of a mile long, probably bouncing off a cell tower way to the south at Dumont Dunes. Just after 4 p.m., they hit that spot and their phones light up. Tom fires off an email to Debbie at CLMRG, found what appears to be Cornelia, have ID, headed to Furnace Creek. He calls Charlie Callahan at Death Valley National Park, one of the original searchers who'd been helpful to them, goes to voicemail. Then they're out of range again. They turn north and drive towards Furnace Creek at a speed that Tom later said he'd prefer not to discuss, given the statute of limitations on speeding in national parks. They screech into the visitor center parking lot at 5:02 p.m., 2 minutes after closing. Les puts on his RMRU t-shirt, Tom's wearing his RMRU cap. They're trying to look like they're not just two random guys coming out of the desert, even though that's exactly what they are. The door's locked, but there's a ranger putting stuff away behind the counter. They knock. They try to look both urgent and calm at the same time because they're tourists sitting right next to them looking at maps. The ranger comes to the door, sees the RMRU logos, and says, "Oh, you're the rescue guys. They're waiting for you out back." Apparently, Charlie got the voicemail. Les and Tom are brought back into the park offices behind the visitor center. Staff and the chief ranger are waiting. As soon as the chief ranger sees the bag and Cornelia's wallet and ID, he gets upset. He tells them they shouldn't have removed the evidence from the site. But once they flash their Riverside County search and rescue cards, and the ranger remembers working with them at the Joshua Tree years back, things start to warm up. The law enforcement staff arrive, and they're actually thrilled to have the identification materials. It gives them a tentative positive ID for the first time in 13 years. They spend half an hour photographing the items. Les and Tom are handed pens and paper and told to write individual narratives of what happened in longhand. As they're writing, more staff keeps streaming in. Word is spreading through the park. One of the Germans has been found. Eventually, they're put on the phone with an Inyo County Sheriff's investigator who asks them to stay overnight for a more thorough interview at 8 a.m. The park graciously offers them a free campsite. If they want an actual room at Furnace Creek Ranch, that's on them. Tom's credit card comes out fast. The next morning, they're at the park headquarters before 8. A ranger tells them they're wanted at the airstrip half a mile away. And waiting there are Inyo County search and rescue members, officers from the county sheriff's office, and a Navy Seahawk helicopter. They need one of them to fly back to the site and show them exactly where the remains are. Les suggests that Tom go. He'll stay back and brief the sheriff's staff. Tom gets into the Seahawk. They fly out to the site. They lift off and head south on a 40-mile flight. Now, Tom knows the pilots have been given GPS coordinates for the site, so he sits back to enjoy the ride, but as they pass over Telescope Peak and Hanapan Canyon, he realizes something's wrong. They're flying away from the site. He gets the attention of the flight officer and starts shaking his head and pointing in a different direction. In the noise of the Seahawk, it's nearly impossible to communicate. The flight officer pulls off one of Tom's hearing protectors and yells that the GPS coordinates that they were given are wrong, miles off. Tom pulls his personal GPS unit out of his Parker pocket, turns it on, he locks on the waypoint he saved, but the metal fuselage is blocking the satellite signal. The flight officers realize what's happening and they unbuckle Tom from his seat. They put a waist harness on him and tethered him to the ceiling. They slide open the right cabin door and wave him over the edge. Tom leans out of the open door of the Seahawk helicopter, GPS in one hand and a death grip on the door handle with the other. He's pointing the pilots towards a bluff in the middle of the desert. You can see the flight officer counting down the distance and feeding the course corrections to the cockpit. They swing over the site. Tom keeps his arm pointed straight down. The other passengers lean forward to look. Even from 100 feet up, you can see scattered skeletal remains on the ground. The Seahawk sets down several hundred meters away to avoid disturbing the site with rotor wash, and everybody piles out. Tom points out the major areas he and Les found the previous day, and then steps back to let the professionals work. He ends up walking with one guy who seems pleasant, but not super familiar with the case, asking a lot of questions. Tom finally asks him what agency he's with. The FBI. Foreign nationals, national park, the Bureau wanted a cursory look. The Seahawk returns with more personnel, and after a while, Tom's told he can go. He's the only passenger on the flight back to Furnace Creek, and when he lands, Les is talking to an Inyo County Sheriff's investigator. The investigator has one question for Les. Where was he on July of 1996? Apparently, Les just looks suspicious. By late morning on November 13th, they're cleared to leave. The Inyo County Sheriff's Office asked them to minimize contact with the press. The site hasn't been secured yet, and if the location gets out, the remains are in jeopardy. By the time Tom and Les reach Barstow, the news is on the wires. After 13 years, one of the Death Valley Germans has been found, but only one. Cornelia's remains were identified. Egbert's were suspected to be nearby based on the scattered bones found around the bluff, but Georg and Max, the 11-year-old and the 4-year-old, were still missing. Within weeks of Tom and Les's discovery, the sheriff's office started planning a full-scale return to the site, and it wasn't simple. The area is inside both a national park and a federally designated wilderness area. The wilderness designation means that the National Park Service seriously frowns on helicopter operations unless there's an immediate threat to human life. And there's no immediate threat here. These are bones. They've been out there for 13 years. They're not going anywhere. But bones are the only realistic reason to go in, and you can't get a search team out there without helicopters. Not in any practical sense. The hike Tom and Les did, 14 miles each way through brutal off-trail terrain with 65-pound packs, took 2 full days just to get into the position. You can't run a multi-team search operation that way. Deputy Tom Winkler of the Inyo County Sheriff's Office took over the planning. He'd actually been decent to deal with. He seemed interested in Tom's input since Tom had actually been to the site. They had a couple of phone conversations. Winkler was struggling with the logistics and the politics of getting helicopters into a wilderness area for a recovery operation. The search was originally planned for late November, but fell apart and got pushed to early December. On December 5th, 2009, about 3 weeks after the discovery, it finally happened. An OES search, that stands for the California Office of Emergency Services. It's a state mutual aid system that lets agencies bring in additional resources. And the resources on this one were impressive. 2 Homeland Security helicopters, 27 searchers in the field, 3 cadaver dogs with handlers, teams from Inyo County Sheriff's Department Search and Rescue, China Lake Mountain Rescue Group, RMRU, San Bernardino Desert Rescue, Calaveras County Search and Rescue, and Death Valley National Park. The cost of the helicopter operation was reportedly covered by the German embassy. The plan was to insert teams by helicopter at 3 landing zones. Bravo was right next to where Tom and Les found the remains. Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 were about 4 miles south, closer to the China Lake boundary. The southern teams would search towards the military boundary and then work their way north. The northern teams would do a detailed sweep of the area around the bluff and the canyons leading down to Anvil Canyon. Everyone would camp overnight near the Bravo site, then hike out the next morning, an 11-mile trek to the trailhead. Tom was assigned to the Alpha team with 2 of his RMRU teammates, Lee Arneson and Pete Carlson. After a wild, low-altitude flight through the canyons, courtesy of the U.S. Customs pilots, they were dropped in one of the most remote spots Tom had ever been. Pete Carlson, a guy who traveled to exotic places all over the world, looked around and said to Tom, "This is the most remote place I've ever been." They headed south towards the China Lake boundary, and about an hour in, they reached the military line. There was nothing there, nothing visible in any direction, just a line on their GPS displays and an old rock cairn that somebody placed years ago to mark the boundary. Tom looked south across the vast expanse of the China Lake property and realized something critical. You couldn't see the Wingate airfield from anywhere along this route. There was no visible human construction, nothing to draw a person to any specific direction. If the Germans made it this far south, they would have seen nothing. Absolutely nothing. And they could have wandered in any direction. The teams turned back north and started the long uphill climb towards Bravo Camp. They arrived around 4 p.m. as it was getting cold and fast. Before dark, several searchers took a closer look at the bluff where Tom and Les found the remains 3 weeks earlier. What they found was sobering. More skeletal remains scattered across the hillside and the base of the cliff. Pieces that Tom walked right past on his first visit. Tunnel vision from rushing downhill to meet Les after that initial discovery. By the time they finished marking everything, the hillside was covered in fluorescent red surveying tape. The night was brutal, 19 degrees Fahrenheit in Death Valley. Most of the searchers brought only summer sleeping bags rated to maybe 30 degrees. Tom described it as a cold and wretched night. The next morning, December 6th, someone with a thermometer confirmed what everybody else knew. Water from the cache started flash freezing into slush as they poured it into their packs. But the cold made the walking pleasant. Before departing, the team spent a couple hours doing a final detailed sweep of the bluff and the hillside. More remains were found and flagged. Tom looked across the slope at the orange shirts moving through the terrain and felt something that he didn't expect: satisfaction. He thought the families in Germany would be touched to see all this interest in their missing relatives after all these years. People who'd volunteered their time and put themselves through genuinely miserable conditions to bring the Germans home. And some of the searchers on that hillside had been on the original search in 1996. For them, this was closure too. By 10 a.m., it was time to leave. A winter storm was moving in faster than forecast. The 11-mile hike out was a grind with gale force winds kicked up as they neared Anvil Canyon. A four-wheel drive was waiting at the trailhead to shuttle them to the secondary command post at Stone Cabin. Hot food, hot drinks, Deputy Winkler, probably in that order of importance. On December 29th, the Sheriff's Department forensic team went by helicopter to retrieve the flagged remains. DNA analysis confirmed what everybody expected. Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer were found together on that bluff in the shade of a rock outcropping barely big enough for 4 people. But the children was still missing, and Tom didn't give up. Over the next year, he made multiple trips back to the area, different routes, different approaches, always looking for George and Max. In March 2010, he did a solo day hike from a completely different direction. 17 miles round trip, most of it cross-country. He found sunglasses near the site, German health insurance cards with Cornelia and Max's names, and a set of keys that looked European. In April, he and Pete Carlson explored the N3 Canyon. It's one of the routes that the Germans may have used to reach the plateau. It was the easiest of 3 possible routes from Anvil Canyon. Gentle slope, obvious path. If the Germans went south, this is probably how. In October, he and Pete hauled 10 gallons of water up to the plateau and buried it for future multi-day searches. In November, a 4-person team camped on the plateau for 2 nights and searched every plausible area they could reach. They found nothing new. The site had been cleaned thoroughly by the forensic team. And then on December 6, 2010, exactly 1 year after that freezing night on the plateau, Tom got a call from Deputy Winkler. About a week earlier, Inyo County had taken a helicopter out to set of coordinates and dropped off 4 or 5 people for an overnight stay. And they'd found children's shoes and small bones. Now here's what makes Tom's blood boil. During the original OES search, years earlier, a departing searcher came across an interesting bone some distance from the site. They took photos and GPS coordinates, but when the helicopter team went to recover the flagged remains, the location was missed. The Inyo County Sheriff's Office was sitting on those coordinates for almost a year, while Tom and his group were busting themselves to get back into the area trip after trip, carrying water, burning boot soles on volcanic rock, spending their own money and vacation time. The sheriff's office had a location for what might be the children's remains and never shared it. Tom offered twice to swing by to those coordinates on his trips in. Both times Winkler just ignored what he said and moved on. Had they shared the information, the whole thing could have been wrapped up months earlier. But then it wouldn't have been found by the Inyo County people, and maybe that was important to them. Winkler told Tom that if his group went back out there and found anything else, the Inyo County Sheriff's Office didn't want it. He also said that they returned the personal effects to the families in Germany and wished to do the same with the bones. In April 2012, Tom sent an email to Karma Roper, the public information officer for the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, asking if any further identifications have been made on the children's remains. She never responded. No formal public announcement was ever made about the recovery of the children's remains or the results of any DNA testing. The case quietly closed. So now you know what happened. You know how they were found, who found them, you know the politics and the bureaucracy and the 13 years of silence. But there's still one part of the story we haven't talked about yet. What it was actually like for them out there. We've been telling this story in reverse, starting with the van and working backwards and forwards through the investigation. But now I want to take you back to July 23rd, 1996, and walk you through what Egbert, Cornelia, George, and Max likely experienced after the van stopped moving. Now, this isn't speculation. This is Tom's reconstruction based on the physical evidence, the terrain, the environmental conditions, and what we know about how the human body fails in extreme heat. The van is dead. It's stuck in Anvil Canyon. 3 tires are flat. The axles are buried. Egbert climbs the bank of the wash and he looks around. To the east, the canyon stretches towards the main valley. That's a long way. To the south, the terrain opens up. He can see what looks like a passable route towards the higher ground. He checks his map. China Lake Naval Weapons Center, south. He goes back to the van. They take what they can carry, water, some food, alcohol. They lock the van and they start walking east down Anvil Canyon. About 1.5 miles from the van, they stop at a bush. Egbert brushes a ledge clear of rocks, sits down on the east side for shade in the late afternoon sun, and drinks a beer. This tells us something important about timing. If he's seeking shade from the late afternoon sun on the east side of the bush, it's probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 in the afternoon. They likely spent the hottest part of the day at or near the van, waiting for it to cool down before moving. Now that's smart. That's a reasonable decision. From the bottle bush, they turn south. Now, we know the temperature at the van's elevation on July 23rd was approximately 107 degrees. As they climb south towards the plateau, they gain some elevation and it cools slightly, but we're still talking about temperatures well above 100 degrees. The terrain south of Anvil Canyon is volcanic rock, loose gravel, dry washes, no trails, no shade except for the occasional brush or rock outcropping. They're carrying 2 children. Max is 4, his legs are short, he's going to fatigue fast. George is 11, old enough to walk on his own, but he's still a kid. The most likely route is south, and it's up N3 Canyon. Tom and Carlson explored it later and confirmed that it's the most obvious choice. Gentle slope, wide enough to walk comfortably, and it gives the appearance of reaching a crest in the distance. About 2 miles up, there's a drop-off into a maze of colorful mud hills cut by deep ravines. Now from above it, it looks impassable, but if you actually descend into it, which Tom did, the depth is an optical illusion. It's not as bad as it looks. Beyond the mud hills, the terrain opens onto the upper alluvial fan. It's a flat, rocky plateau stretching about 1.5 miles north-south and 2 miles east-west. And on the southern edge of that plateau is the rim of hills where you'd get your first clear view of what lies to the south. This is almost certainly where the plan fell apart, because what you see from that rim is nothing. The vast, empty expanse. No sign of human existence anywhere. The military base Egbert was counting on, the one with the fences, the guards, and the people who'd help, isn't visible. It might as well not exist. Now, they've been walking for hours in heat that would challenge a fit adult with unlimited water, with those 2 children, and limited supplies. And the thing that they're walking towards isn't there. This is probably the moment Egbert realized that they were in a survival situation. He finds the bluff, that small rock outcropping on the plateau. It provides a few feet of shade, and it's the best shelter available for miles, so they stop. Now here's what happens to the human body at 107 degrees with limited water. The first thing you notice is thirst. Brutal, overwhelming thirst. Your body is losing water through sweat faster than you can replace it. Then the cramps start. Your muscles are losing electrolytes. Your calves lock up and your hands cramp. Your body is dumping every resource it has into cooling the blood. Your heart rate climbs and you start to feel dizzy. You're confused. Decision-making deteriorates. Then the sweating stops. And that's the line. Once the sweating stops, your body's exhausted its ability to cool itself. Core temperature starts climbing, and nothing you can do can bring it back down without external intervention. Shade, water, cooling. They have some shade. They don't have enough water, though. The children go first. Smaller bodies overheat faster. Max at 4 years old and George at 11, their surface to mass ratio means that they lose the ability to thermoregulate sooner than the adults. They become lethargic and drift in and out of consciousness. Their skin goes hot and dry, followed by seizures. Egbert and Cornelia are watching this happen to their children, and there's nothing they can do. There's a half moon that night. It rose at 1:24 in the afternoon and won't set until 11:34 a.m. So there's light past midnight, but a summer night in Death Valley at this elevation only drops the temperature to around the high 70s. There's no real relief. And by the next morning, July 24th, if they survive the night, the sun comes back, and with it, temperatures climbing right back above 100. No rescues coming. Nobody knows they're there. The van won't be found for another 90 days. They died on that bluff under a few feet of shade with their children, and the desert kept them for 13 years. Tom said something about this case that I find significant. He said he could have made the same choices Egbert made, and he's right. That's what makes this story different from every other stupid tourist dies in the desert story that you've ever heard. These weren't stupid people. They weren't reckless, and they weren't ignoring warning signs. They were a family on vacation who made a series of decisions that each made sense at the time. Taking a scenic route through Butte Valley, that's what tourists do. Every single decision was reasonable. Not one of them was crazy, but the desert doesn't care about reasonable. The desert doesn't care about your logic or your map or your plan. It takes what it takes. Egbert Rimkus was 34, Cornelia Meyer was 28, George Weber was 11, Max was only 4 years old. They were found by a search and rescue volunteer who'd been doing the job for 8 months. A guy who asked one question that 250 professional searchers never thought to ask. Not where did they go, but why. I'm John Genoa. This has been America's Strangest History. Catch you next time.